Hey there, listeners. Welcome to Heinz on Air, your weekly dose of inspiration, motivation, and real-life entrepreneurial stories. I'm Matt Hines, your host, and I'm excited to have you join me on this journey. From building a successful law firm to venturing into other industries like real estate and social media, I've experienced both the triumphs and the challenges that come with entrepreneurship. I've learned firsthand the importance of resilience, adaptability, and a relentless pursuit of excellence. On Heinz on Air, we're diving deep into the world of business, law, and personal growth. Join me as I chat with incredible guests who have faced adversity, defied expectations, and achieved extraordinary success. We'll discuss their strategies, their mindset, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or simply someone looking for a little inspiration, Heinz on Air is for you. Remember to subscribe, like, and leave a review whenever you listen to podcasts. Your support helps us reach more people and continue sharing these incredible stories. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, Matt Hines. I'm back with you. Another Hines on Air. We have an exciting, I think a very interesting topic today with an expert in the field. So joining us today is James Porfido, and he is the author of a book called Unequal Justice, A Search for Truth to Balance the Scales. James is a very experienced criminal defense attorney. He has also worked on the side of the government, but he's got both perspectives and kind of can weigh it from every angle. He's also a law professor at Seton Hall University. So, James, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too, man. Look, I think this is a fascinating topic. Certainly, we've seen, I don't mean to get into politics. I don't know your stance. But after I saw what happened to Trump, it became very obvious that it's not always fair when you go to court. It would be a lovely, perfect world if we could walk into a courtroom and say, you know what, I'm innocent, so I don't have anything to worry about here. But unfortunately, that's not really the case, or the outcomes just don't justify for me. Because we have a law firm and we practice criminal defense, and I've seen fairness, and I've seen very unfairness, and I've seen judges who just seem to have it out for a defendant even before they've heard any evidence. I mean, it is their goal to work with the prosecutor to make sure that guy gets put in jail without hearing a damn thing.
Yeah, sadly so.
So it's frustrating. So tell us about your book and kind of your perspectives on the.
Sure, there's so much to talk about, Matt. I mean, and you talked about the politicalization. I try to avoid that topic and really not get into the weeds on that, but it's really hard not to speak to that issue when you're an attorney because you're trained to be analytical. You try to look at both sides of the equation for fairness and justice. And that's what, criminal lawyers or litigators look for. And I always said it didn't matter to me if it was Donald Duck or Donald Trump. It didn't matter the difference. We all have to be treated the same way. And when you look at the system, treating someone differently, then you obviously, it's kind of a call to justice, where you look at that and you say, we need to get into the weeds and look at this. This is really not the way the system's supposed to work. And I agree with what you said. Sometimes when you're representing somebody that's accused of something really terrible, you're walking into court and you feel like the deck is stacked against you already. And, the burden of proof is always on the state, the government. And I experienced that from both sides. I mean, the book was really the product of 35 years of experience. And I say, and I'm holding the book up because you can't really see the whole book behind me, but that's the cover of the book. And it's really Lady Justice peeking out from the scale from underneath the blindfold. And that's the way I kind of felt, is that the system was a bit, somebody had their finger on the scale, and I saw that later on in my career, going from being a prosecutor representing the state to going to the defense side. And that kind of was an awakening experience, quite frankly, to see that perception and live that out in a courtroom where you feel like the deck is stacked against you or it's an unfair fight.
When you said the deck was stacked against you, you mean as the defense attorney, correct?
Correct. I would not, I said that as a prosecutor because, I was a much younger attorney at that time. I felt like, hey, everything is the way it's supposed to be. But there was, I think at that time, still an unfair prejudice in favor of the prosecution. And, I wasn't ready to admit that, but certainly I had a lot of advantages on my side. For instance, just the positioning in the courtroom, counsel table being next to the jury box, the ability to speak to a jury and say, hey, I'm one of you. You guys are paying my salary. That goes a long way. And, I'm here because not that you're stating your opinion, but I believe this case is meritorious and really deserves a stay. And you guys need to find this person guilty. A jury's inclined to believe that. They're like, hey, he's one of the good guys. He's fighting for us. And, we got to believe what he's saying. And 9 times out of 10, in fact, they would.
That is the scary part to me.
It is.
So you believe that a jury is more inclined to believe a government attorney versus a defense attorney?
From my experience, the answer to that would be yes. And I feel a lot of that has to do with the judges involved in the case, maybe some of the pretrial rulings, and it could be just the demeanor of the judge or the court in a case. And juries, they pick up on that stuff. They're sitting there, they're very attentive, they're following their obligation, their duty to be a juror, which means that they've got to kind of leave their prejudices and biases outside the courtroom, and they're kind of a blank slate. So what are they doing? Well, they're following the cues. They're looking at the attorneys, who's doing a better job, who's more presentable, who's more credible, who's more believable. They listen to the judge. If the judge is kind of swayed one way or the other, they can pick that up. They're picking up everything.
Yeah, I don't have near the experience you do. I've had maybe 2 major criminal cases. One was rape, one was trafficking, meth. And the rape case, I thought the jury did listen and they were fair. On the other one, you just got this feeling. Actually, all right, so I got co-counsel with me on this case, a guy who'd been in this area for, 25 years. He knew the area, and he's like, Matt, she's going to be found guilty. That's what he kept telling me. She's going to be found guilty. I'm like, don't say that. Like, come on, let's just give it a shot. And he had just been in that area so long where, and I think he was right, unfortunately, in this situation, because the jury, the way they would listen, the way they responded to the prosecutor, it was like their duty to make sure this person went to jail. Because there was reasonable doubt in the case, I thought. But I just got this feeling we were run up as a brick wall because they were really not going to listen. It was their duty to make sure that the criminal goes to jail, not to listen to the facts and decide on the evidence. It was sad. It was scary too.
Well, it's that way for sure sometimes, and it could be the case that you're handling, the particular charges, the individual. I mean, I've represented a Catholic priest in a sexual abuse case, and you felt like you were guilty before you ever walked into the courtroom because there was such a perception out there. And it was right around the time the movie Spotlight had come out, which really revealed the abuses in the Boston diocese, and I believe Mark Ruffalo was the actor that played the attorney in the case, and that was fresh on their minds. So it's very hard in selecting a jury to have them disassociate themselves from their life and their experiences and what they're exposed to, and it is a big problem, in the Catholic Church, the clergy sexually abusing young people, and it was well known and certainly my client and I had that conversation. I said, this is going to be an uphill battle, I can tell you. And I felt in my heart that I had clearly provided enough reasonable doubt to the jury for them to acquit him. And I talk about it actually in the book. I talk about representing this particular priest. And I think that the chapter is The Victim That Never Aged, because the case was put off. I was probably the third attorney into it. And it was probably 5 years down the road. And he was a young priest at the time of trial, and as well as the time of the commission of the alleged offenses that ultimately he was convicted of one. She was about 15 and he was about 30. So, he had that position of responsibility and authority over this particular young woman. But I felt like 5 years later, when I was finally involved in the case and we were going to trial, hey, the jury's got to look at this particular victim differently. She's got to be a 20-year-old. She's not going to be 15 years old. And, Well, when she came in to testify, she looked like she was 12 years old. So I called her the victim that never aged because she looked like a young child. And as soon as I saw her, I was like, wow, I think this certainly worsened your chances to be acquitted by a jury. Ultimately, the jury found, I believe, a 7-count indictment. And there was some interesting backstory to the case because the head prosecutor of sex crimes had contacted the diocesan attorney, the head attorney that represented the diocese, and said, look, we're going to go forward and your client's going to have to plead guilty. And the diocesan attorney said, well, he's never even set foot in the courtroom. How can you say that? He said, well, because we're going to indict him for this charge. It was a little bit obscure, this charge of luring, Luring. And, in my mind, and the general reaction of the community, luring is, somebody drives up in a car and they try to get a child into the car to abduct them, to sexually abuse them, or God forbid something far worse than that. That was my idea of luring, enticing. And ultimately, that was one of the counts in the indictment that they had gone for, the prosecution of the state had indicted for. And I actually went as far as to bring in the diocesan attorney to testify as a witness that he had had that conversation and memorialized it in an email that they were going to basically, get this guy to plead guilty and they were going to indict him for this higher level crime of luring. And ultimately, that's what he was convicted of because of carrying much more exposure in terms of state prison and the implications regarding sexual offenses, Macy's law registration requirements, and some of the other things.
So he was found guilty?
He was found guilty, but I felt like that was a very difficult case because, as you said, when you walk in a courtroom, sometimes you have that feeling, hey, this is going to be tough. I'm going to do my job and I'm going to go above and beyond, but no matter what I do, I feel like it's not going to be enough.
That's so scary. What is the penalty for something like that?
Well, the penalty was a maximum of 10 years in state prison and serving up to 85% under the No Early Release Act, which means 85% of the sentence must be served before you're deemed eligible for parole or release. Thankfully, the judge, in the discretion of the court, sentenced him to the lower range. It was 6 years, and he was paroled after having served 85% of that 6 years.
And he denied it?
You know what? He did deny it. He maintained his innocence. He confessed that he, in fact, had like an inappropriate conversational relationship, and the topics and the subjects of the conversations were inappropriate. The testimony of the victim in the case is that he was sitting next to her on a couch and ultimately put his arm around her and fell on top of her, pushed her down. And he denied that. He said, yes, I did. He put my arm around her. That was totally inappropriate. He was ultimately sanctioned by the church under canon law, which is the religious law that's in place. And they said it was inappropriate for him. The luring was him going from the church to the rectory, which was about probably, I don't know, maybe 10 yards, walking across a courtyard into the church and bringing the young woman up to his room. Which was clearly inappropriate. So the church had already come down on him and removed him. And I think that was another uphill battle, quite frankly, as well, because once the jury heard that the church had imposed some form of punishment, he must be guilty.
So he put his arm around her and fell on her, and then he carried her up to his room?
No. He brought her up to the room. They were sitting on the couch talking about things that were clearly inappropriate, dating relationships, sexual relationships. I think she was talking about, engaging in dating relationships and the extent of where those things were going. And clearly, subjects perhaps he should not have been talking about on the level that he was. He wasn't offering help as like a counselor or a psychologist or something like that. And he did put his arm around her, and his claim, which I think, it may not have been a credible claim, and the jury had to evaluate that as well, that he rolled into her. I don't know that I could believe that as well, that he ultimately was on the floor. How did they end up on the floor? How did they go from the couch to the floor? He's admitted he's put his arm around her, but not admitting to any other the conduct. So he ultimately was convicted of the luring for bringing her from the church to the rectory. But he was found not guilty of the remaining counts, to my recollection of the remaining counts of the indictment.
What's the directory? Is that his like dorm room, or what does that mean?
The rectory is like a house where the priests live. It's provided through the church, and it's typically like a house, and they live there, and they have their own bedrooms, depending upon the church and how many priests are there. The rectory is really like their own housing. I won't say like a dorm. It's more residential than that.
And so you added something there. You said they were on the floor together. So when
Correct.
He had his arm around her, he fell over, whatever, and then they were on the floor like kissing, or what was he like trying to?
She claimed he was on the floor, like grinding on her, intimately, but the jury did not find that to be persuasive or convincing in terms of the evidence that was provided. But they did find him guilty of luring, which was a very serious charge.
Well, the luring didn't seem to me enough to get that, because 6 years to me is a lot of.
Sure was, yeah.
If they found like he had forced himself on her, I'd understand. It's odd they didn't find the other, but well done to you. So luring is the act of just sort of trying to get somebody to be interested in you sexually, or trying to put them in a position.
Well, my idea of it, my thought of it, my own mindset was that luring is if an individual were to try to, say to a child, hey, do you want to get into my car? I have a puppy here, or, say I have candy or something, and I'm they're trying to entice them or get them to remove them from a situation to be in their situation where they could commit another offense. But the offense in and of itself is the act of getting them to come with you. That's the luring.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Yeah, that would be tough, certainly with the sentiment and all going on. I know, going back to Trump, and again, I'm not trying to get political, but his attorney, I remember seeing her, Alina Habba. She was describing her case where, the mortgage fraud case, where he was supposed to have embellished or overvalued his assets. And it was ultimately found guilty on, but, Alina Habba was describing how they would have evidence, like a piece of paper, to show the judge, here, judge, look at this. This shows the value. This shows this. And the judge's like, I don't want to see it. I don't care. I don't want to see it. That would be so. That's happened to me before. I'm sure it's happened to you too. It's like, what the hell? This is relevant evidence. Why doesn't a judge want to at least see it and consider it?
Yeah, that was troubling for sure. Well, fast forward, Alina Habba is now the acting interim U.S. attorney for the state of New Jersey.
I knew she was in the government. I didn't know which. So what's her position?
She is the acting U.S. attorney for the state of New Jersey right now. That means she's been appointed. I don't know if it's going to be a full appointment, but she's the acting U.S. attorney for the state of New Jersey right now. But getting to your point, yeah, that was a very powerful piece of evidence to show, in fact, he did not. And I think the appraisal on the property showed, quite frankly, that he undervalued his property considerably.
Right.
And it was quite the opposite, that the appraisal would have shown that the property was worth far more than what was represented when he was seeking. And by the way, there were no victims in that case. The mortgage companies were all paid back. And so these are cases, quite frankly, where you scratch your head and say, wait, this should not happen. And is it only happening because it's him? And that gets back to what I said before. It doesn't matter if it's Donald Duck or Donald Trump. If that's evidence that's relevant and under the rules of our evidence, which is the probative value outweighs the danger of unfair prejudice, then that evidence needs to be presented and should be allowed. And it was not. It was prevented from being testified to or even presented in the case, in the defense. So, you have a very one-sided.
Yeah. It is so demoralizing to the U.S. because we kind of think that even though life's not fair, at least we can take it to a level where fairness will rule. My neighbor might be an asshole, But at least I have a court or somewhere I can go to where there can be a fair arbiter that can help us out and, rule on the side of rightness. And then when you see a judge or political figure or something just completely make an insane judgment or insane behavior, it just breaks down our trust in the whole system. It's sad.
Yeah, well, that's the fundamental issue, isn't it really, that you need judges that are fair, impartial, detached, and neutral. That's it. And sadly, in this world that we live in, and I'm sure it's happened in the past, and it's really hard to say you need to leave all your prejudices and your biases outside, because we're all human beings. We all have, things that we may have in the back of our minds, and it's hard to separate yourself from those. But if it's a political interest and it's a politically motivated case, you have to look at yourself and examine your conscience and say, this is not something I should be presiding over. If it's a bench trial, even a jury trial, because the judge can direct a jury through their actions or their words or their rulings. The judge needs to have that kind of moment where they say, this is the case I really should not be involved in. I need to recuse myself. And this should go to another judge who will be a better arbiter of the facts and of the case, and ultimately, the evidence will be decided either by the judge or by the jury, whether it meets that burden of proof. In a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil case, it's a preponderance of the evidence. Or, so that's really where you look at these situations and say, maybe these judges should not have been involved to begin with, And if they're politically motivated and they have been shown to have political attachments, and it's very difficult to do, quite frankly, because when you look at our system and you look at the appointments of judges, whether it's the Supreme Court or federal court, in New Jersey and state court, the governor appoints the judges, the prosecutor, and the head law enforcement officer for the state, which is the attorney general. Other states, it's very different. It's by election. So you vote for a judge, you vote for a DA or a prosecutor. It's very different. Now, you look at that system, you might say, well, there's problems there too, because you have to raise money to run a successful campaign, and who's supporting your campaign. And, it's going to be hard to separate yourself from those conflicts too.
I will say this, because juries get a bad rep. And you'll often hear people say, you don't know what a jury's going to do. They could be insane, and they can be insane. I would say, from most of my experience with juries, they've actually been pretty astute. They've been pretty reasonable. I always make an effort to go talk to the jury after a trial. And for the most part, they were listening. And they actually contemplated the evidence and balanced it out as best they could. I didn't see a bias or an insanity or an idiocy that made me think, Jesus, this is so horrible. What's your opinion there? Do you trust juries, or do you think they're kind of?
Well, it's our system. It's a system we have. It's a system we've had in place, and its roots are tied to the English common law, from our days when we were, I don't want to say a colony, but we were a colony under English law until the Revolution. And so, it's the best that we have. And I do truly believe that jurors are civic-minded. I think that people, there's like an expression out there, you're dumb enough to stay in the jury or something like that. I don't know what the expression, you couldn't get out of jury duty, and I look at it as a noble and an honorable thing if people actually want to remain in a case and take on that role and responsibility as a juror. So I have to believe in that system, because I believe that is our system and that's what we've operated under. Is it perfect? No, but I do think they tend to want in their hearts very much to get it right. Are they always listening and evaluating the things that you or I might think that they should be focusing or evaluating on? Maybe not. But I do believe they legitimately want to do the right thing. I have no doubt in my mind when they sit there and they're sworn in as jurors that they're committed to that obligation. They recognize that responsibility.
Yeah, that's good. Did you follow that Young Thug trial any? That was down here in Atlanta.
A little bit. And I know there was some, the judge was involved in not recusing himself in that particular case. And, obviously that was a bad decision. The judge had ties to this and had pretty much stated that there was some prejudices in the case. And that's fundamentally a problem, if you have a judge that is on one side or the other. And I was up against that many times. I always felt, at least from the defense perspective, it was an unfair fight. It was 2 against 1. The judge and the prosecutor were against me. And yeah.
A day, right? Pretty much every day.
Yeah. And if you're in the same courts and you're part of that same system and you go to those, that's your county or your venue, and you're in front of those same judges and dealing with those same prosecutors time and time again, you kind of see the lay of the land, and it doesn't get any easier.
Right. That's right. I mean, they bonded, I think, by now for years of working together. In the Young Thug trial, is just interesting because it goes to your point of the problem that we're talking about now. Judge Glanville was his name. He was in charge of the trial. He had secret meetings with a witness without the defense counsel present. Meeting with witness.
That's correct. That's right. I remember that now. Correct.
The attorney, the defense counsel, is asked about it, and he wouldn't say who told him. He's like, I can't tell you. So the judge held him in contempt and tried to throw him in jail. And it's the boldness and how wrong they are, but just like, yeah, I'm wrong, but I'll do whatever the hell I want. It was shocking to me that a judge would act like that, especially it's televised and everything. This damn judge was going to break the rules and meet with a witness without the attorneys present and then get angry with somebody for calling them on it. It was like, what the hell's happening?
Well, you had a famous case down there as well with Fannie Willis and her boyfriend trying to prosecute. That was a flawed prosecution from the beginning, and who in their right minds could actually foresee that it's okay for the lead DA or prosecutor to pay her boyfriend $600,000, and they were recently caught on camera going away together, and they denied they were having a relationship. Clearly lied to the judge when he testified to the question that was posed. And, she's paying him $600,000. He has no prosecutorial experience, and there really was no crime that was committed. They were trying to make a crime to convict, and ultimately the court found that she should not have been involved in that case. And clearly there was a bias and an interest in her. The manner in which she went about the prosecution was flawed. And, that case got a lot of national publicity as well. And that's a prosecutor.
Trump, I don't know who from above sent Trump that gift, but it totally, overplayed anything he had done. It became their whole affair issue. It was a gift.
Yeah.
It was a interesting change of events.
Yeah, and Nathan Wade, the boyfriend, literally got on the stand and denied that he had some type of sexual relation with her I guess he was asked a question whether they had sexual relations, and it took him a long time to answer it. Ultimately, he denied that he had ever been in a cabin with her. He was asked, have you been in, because apparently there was a cabin they had gone away to. They were calling it the Love Shack, and apparently he denied that. And then lo and behold, of course, we know they were having a sexual relationship, a romantic relationship.
Yeah, that's right. Well, listen, I appreciate what you're doing. I think we have too many people in jail, and probably a lot of them are there for the wrong reasons. It was funny. It's not funny. It's more interesting. But I was at an event this past weekend. It's called 10X. It's a Grant Cardone event, a motivational event.
I'm familiar. I'm familiar with it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Alina Habba was there, as a matter of fact. That's what made me think of her earlier. And also there was Martha Stewart. And Martha Stewart.
I'm sorry.
I said also Martha Stewart.
Martha Stewart. Okay.
And she was talking about when she was in jail, and she mentioned the relationships she had made while there. Because it was a pretty decent experience for her. She wouldn't. She had to go. It was all bullshit, but she went for 5 or 6 months, and she had met this one lady who had cut her arm and bled on it was like weapons of mass destruction somewhere. Like she was protesting the weapons and war and stuff like that. This is a nun. They gave her 10 years on the charge of trespassing. This poor lady was stuck in jail for 10 years off some bullshit. And, that's one example of many, but I love what you're pushing, that, if somebody has committed a crime and they're hurting others, okay, let's deal out justice. But we got too many people in jail. And then that brings up the whole issue with privately owned jails, which are requiring a set number of inmates.
Well, that was a huge expose in Pennsylvania, quite frankly. The judge was sentencing these young people to a juvenile detention facility that his friend was running. And apparently the judge was getting kickbacks for every juvenile meaning under the age of 18 offender that was sent there, or being sent there for some ridiculously minimal type offenses. And some of these kids harmed themselves and killed themselves because they were sentenced by this judge. And the judge was actually, you can Google this, it's Luzerne County in Pennsylvania. And this judge was ultimately, I believe, he was removed from the bench. I think he was criminally convicted for doing this, engaging in this fraudulent, and put these kids' lives on the line. It's really sad to put them away like that, and they should not have been incarcerated. But, the privatization of this facility obviously led to this.
Yeah, it should. I saw a graph the other day, and it was correlating the rise in incarceration in our country with the amount of privatized jails. And they both go together. It's crazy numbers. And it's sad. A lot of judges and politicians will run on the campaign slogan, "I'm tough on crime." Okay, great. But don't throw a lot of people in jail just to prove how much you're trying to protect the community. That's bullshit.
Well, we have very harsh handgun laws, weapons laws in New Jersey, and there's a mandatory sentencing in our law under what's called the Graves Act, where people are incarcerated for a specific period of time. They must be locked up, and the judge has no discretion in that area. Well, if you look at what's called the legislative intent behind the enactment of this mandatory jail time, it talked about gang violence and the commission of crimes by gangs using guns. And this was going to be a discouragement. Well, that's not how it's being applied by the courts. It's just being applied, uniformly across the board. And so people are being sentenced on gun charges where they simply have a possession charge, a wrongful possession. They're not licensed to possess that firearm, and they could be sentenced to a state prison sentence. And to me, that seems so contrary to what the legislative intent was behind the enactment of the statute. But if you try to bring that to the judge's attention, mandatory sentencing make it hard, impossible almost.
Yeah, that's right. Well, listen, James, I could talk with you forever, to be honest. This is something I'm passionate about, and clearly you are too. We're running out of time, but do you want to tell us real quick about your book?
Sure. I'll tell you. It really, I say the book kind of wrote itself. I didn't write the book. It's really the experiences and the people that were involved in the particular cases. And, they left a lasting, indelible impression on me. And I talk about those experiences. I talk about representation of crime victims, being part of an organization and representing some pretty serious cases that, getting funeral expenses for a mom whose son was murdered, representing a family, providing legal advice and assistance to them when their daughter was murdered by a gang member at a fraternity party. She had come to Seton Hall to play basketball, and she was murdered at a frat party. And the killer was ultimately convicted and sentenced. Representing a family whose children, both their son and their daughter, were killed by a drunk driver, and getting justice for them, whatever justice means, because it wasn't going to bring their children back, but making sure that the prosecutor did the job that they were supposed to do and get the killer convicted, who was driving in excess of the blood alcohol and had driven recklessly and killed their children. So, it's a whole global perspective really on my experiences as an attorney over 35 years from the prosecution, representation of crime victims, the defense, and certainly being eligible and being considered for the top prosecutor appointments by the governor. I talk about that a little bit in the book. And I talk about being a TV legal analyst and doing some high-profile cases over the years and having some experience with that as a TV legal analyst and having the ability to talk about cases that were in the national news, cases that were like roll off your tongue, like OJ or the Scott Peterson case or the Menendez brothers. So, I had some involvement in those cases talking about them as a legal expert, and they were all great experiences. So I wanted to share that in the book.
I bet those are fascinating stories. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I encourage everybody. The book is Unequal Justice, The Search for Truth to Balance the Scales. We'll put that in the comments below. But listen, James, again, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on all you've done on your book, on everything you've accomplished.
Thank you, Matt. And the book is readily available on Amazon.com, at Barnes & Noble, and you can certainly find it by just typing in www.unequal-justice.com or my name, James Porfido or Porfido Law, and you'll find me. There's a website, and certainly I'd be happy to get the book out to you. And I appreciate that. Thanks so much, Matt, for having me on.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks again, James. And thank everybody else for joining us. I hope you've listened and learned something and contributed to this topic, because this is important. I don't think governments do enough to correct this problem. It's been a problem for a long time. Different governments come in, they say they're going to do reforms to the laws. Not enough happens. And we got a lot of bad things happening to actually decent people. So anyway, I hope you listened. I hope you enjoyed. Please follow us on YouTube, comment, and share this with your friends. And we'll see you next time on Heinz on Air.
Heinz on Air is for you. Remember to subscribe, like, and leave a review whenever you listen to podcasts. Your support helps us reach more people and continue sharing these incredible stories.